The first time I noticed it, I was pulling the sheets up on our bed. The faint scent lingered, something unfamiliar. Not her usual perfume, no trace of lavender or the warm, vanilla notes I knew so well. This was sharper, more masculine. I froze for a moment, leaning in to inhale the pillow where her head had rested the night before. There it was again. Faint, but unmistakable. New detergent? I muttered to myself, though the excuse felt hollow even as I whispered it aloud. The thought latched onto the edges of my mind, a seed that refused to die no matter how many times I told myself it was nothing. But that's how it begins, doesn't it? Doubt. Quiet at first, a faint whisper in the back of your mind. And if you ignore it, it doesn't go away. It grows. That night, Emily lay beside me, her body a familiar presence in the dark. I reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing against the small dip of her waist. She flinched, a barely perceptible twitch, but I felt it. Her breathing changed, a slight hitch before she shifted away. Tired, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Long day, I asked, keeping my tone soft, almost casual. She hummed, but her words felt distant, her body even more so. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. The room felt heavier somehow, the silence pressing down on me. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds between us. But it was the little things that chipped away at my certainty. The next morning, I noticed how quickly she grabbed her phone off the nightstand, as if hiding it from view. She used to leave it lying around, not a care in the world. Now, it was always face down, tucked just out of reach. I brushed it off. Privacy. Everyone's entitled to it. But then there were the late nights. Work's insane right now, she'd say, her eyes avoiding mine as she slipped on her heels, her lips a little too red for just another late meeting. Another project? I asked one night, casually stirring the pasta I was making for dinner. Yeah. She didn't elaborate. When's the deadline? Her hand paused mid-motion as she tied her hair up. Next week, I think. You think? I asked, my tone laced with something I couldn't quite hide. She laughed, but it felt forced. You know how it is. They keep changing the timeline. I'll be back before you know it. But she wasn't. Then came the credit card statement. It arrived by mail, which was strange in itself. We'd switched to paperless over a year ago. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was junk mail, but something about the envelope gave me pause. I tore it open, not expecting much. And then I saw it. A charge from the Carlton, a boutique hotel downtown. A bar tab. A dinner for two. The date stared back at me. A Thursday night. One of her late meetings. My pulse hammered in my ears as I read it again, hoping I was wrong, that I was somehow misunderstanding. But the numbers didn't change. Neither did the gnawing feeling in my gut. $242.76. Too much for a casual business dinner. And I knew Emily. She wasn't the type to spend that kind of money on herself without mentioning it. My hands trembled slightly as I set the paper down on the counter, but my mind was already racing ahead. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe a work dinner that ran late. Maybe her boss had invited a client, and she picked up the tab. But if that were the case, why hadn't she mentioned it? I paced the kitchen, the cool tiles grounding me as I tried to keep the spiraling thoughts at bay. I told myself I wouldn't jump to conclusions. Ask her. Just ask her. But when she came home that night, the words died in my throat. Hey, she said, dropping her bag by the door and flashing me a tired smile. Sorry I'm late. You okay? My eyes flickered to her lips. No trace of the red lipstick she'd worn that morning. Her hair was slightly tousled, as if she'd run her fingers through it too many times. But it was her eyes that gave me pause, guarded, distant. Yeah, I murmured, forcing a smile that felt heavy on my face. And just like that, the moment passed. The question remained unasked. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing. Over the next few days, I started noticing more things. The subtle changes that had once seemed harmless now screamed at me in retrospect. Her laughter was different, shorter, more reserved. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And the distance between us, the one I had once brushed off as stress, felt like an ever-widening chasm. She was glued to her phone more than ever, and when I'd glance over, she'd turn the screen away, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she'd smile and change the subject. Who's that? I asked once, keeping my tone light. Just work stuff. She replied too quickly, slipping the phone into her pocket. And the scent, that damned scent. It lingered on her clothes after her nights out. Woodsy, with a hint of spice. It wasn't hers. It wasn't mine. And yet, it followed her home like a ghost, whispering things I wasn't ready to hear. I didn't want to be that guy. The one who snooped through his wife's things. The one who questioned every word, who saw betrayal in every glance. But the unease was a constant companion now, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But paranoia doesn't leave bruises on your heart. And it doesn't explain a charge from a hotel where she had no reason to be. The confrontation was inevitable. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. So I watched. I waited. And I told myself that the truth, no matter how ugly, was better than living in this purgatory of doubt. But I had no idea how deep the betrayal went. Not yet. The days after I found the credit card statement passed in a blur. I tried to push it aside, to convince myself that confronting her without more proof would only make things worse. But the questions haunted me, lingering just beneath the surface. I started noticing everything. Every glance. Every word. Every change. It was like standing in a house where the walls had begun to crack, the foundation shifting beneath my feet. You tell yourself the creaks are normal, that houses settle over time. But deep down, you know, something is breaking. It was the little things that stood out the most. Emily had always been a creature of habit. Every morning, she'd wake up before me, shuffle into the kitchen to start the coffee, and hum softly under her breath. Usually some old song from the 90s. I loved those mornings, the quiet rhythm of our life together. But now, silence. She was still getting up early, but the music was gone. The lightness in her step had vanished. And instead of lingering by the coffee maker, she'd disappear into the bathroom with her phone. The bathroom door stayed locked longer these days. I heard the muffled hum of her voice sometimes, soft, urgent whispers that she tried to hide beneath the sound of running water. My stomach clenched every time. I didn't ask. Not yet. Then there were her nights out. They became more frequent, always work-related. Always the same vague excuses. Deadlines coming up. Team dinner to go over the presentation. Networking event, won't be late. But she was. Every damn time. And when she came home, she'd slide into bed beside me, her body warm but her heart miles away. I could feel the space between us growing, a silent chasm that neither of us dared to address. I started keeping track without meaning to. Thursday, Friday, even a Sunday once. Who has work meetings on a Sunday? I checked her calendar when she left her laptop open one morning. Nothing. No meetings. No deadlines. Just blank spaces where her excuses should have been. And then there was the perfume. I smelled it again a few nights after the credit card statement. This time, it was stronger, clinging to the fibers of her blouse, mingling with the faint scent of wine and something else, something that didn't belong. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Late night. I asked casually as she walked in. Yeah. She kicked off her heels by the door, not meeting my eyes. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her lipstick faded but still there, smudged at the corner. I noticed the flush in her cheeks, the way her fingers fumbled as she unbuttoned her blouse. You okay? I asked, forcing a smile. Just tired. She sighed, leaning against the doorframe. Work's been a lot. I finished for her. Yeah. Her eyes flickered to mine for a fraction of a second before looking away. I'm going to take a shower. Always a shower. It wasn't like Emily. She used to hate showering at night, claiming it messed with her sleep. But now, every time she came home late, she headed straight for the bathroom, to wash him off her skin. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from my lungs. I pushed it down, forcing logic to drown out the ache in my chest. Don't assume. Don't accuse without proof. But the cracks in our foundation were growing, and I could feel them beneath my feet. Then came the neighbor. I wasn't looking for confirmation. I wasn't snooping or prying. But sometimes, the truth finds you when you least expect it. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was trimming the bushes by the front porch when Mrs. Callahan from next door wandered over, her usual warm smile in place. Hey, Daniel, she greeted, peering over the low hedge. Afternoon, Mrs. Callahan, I replied, wiping the sweat off my forehead. She glanced toward the driveway, her expression shifting slightly. Emily not around. Out for a work thing, I said automatically, though the words tasted bitter on my tongue. Her smile faltered, just for a second. "Oh," she said softly. "I thought I saw her a few nights ago." My heart skipped a beat. "A few nights ago?" She nodded, her brow furrowing slightly. "Yeah, I was taking Bailey out for a walk. Thought I saw her getting into a car. Didn't think much of it. Figured it was an Uber or something." A car. My mind reeled. "What time was this?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. Mrs. Callahan frowned, clearly trying to recall. "Late. Maybe around 11? I remember because Bailey wouldn't stop barking that night. 11. Emily had come home after midnight that night. She'd told me she was at a dinner with her boss. But if she was getting into a car at 11, everything okay? Mrs. Callahan asked gently, sensing my sudden silence. I forced a smile that felt foreign on my face. Yeah, just tired. Of course. She patted my arm lightly. "Take care, dear." I barely heard her as she walked away. My mind was already racing. The car. It wasn't an Uber. I knew that now. She hadn't mentioned anything. No meeting. No explanation. And yet, there she was, getting into a car late at night when she was supposed to be somewhere else. My stomach churned, the weight of it pressing down on me like a lead blanket. What the hell was happening? I started paying closer attention after that. Her phone was my first target. Not that she gave me much opportunity. But one night, while she was in the shower, I noticed she'd left it on the nightstand. Face down. As always. I shouldn't have touched it. I know that. But the need to know was stronger than my conscience. I picked it up, my pulse pounding in my ears as I flipped it over. Locked. Of course. I wasn't surprised, but the knot in my stomach tightened. And then I saw it. A notification. "See you tomorrow. Can't wait." Red heart, my hand clenched around the phone, the blood draining from my face. It wasn't a name I recognized. Just a number. No name. No contact photo. But I didn't need a name. The message said enough. "See you tomorrow. Can't wait." I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I lay awake beside her, my mind racing, replaying every conversation, every excuse, every lie. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, something that made sense. But the cracks were too wide now. The foundation was crumbling. And soon, it was going to collapse. Nights became the hardest. Lying beside her, I felt the weight of her presence and the unbearable distance between us. Emily's body was warm, her breathing steady, but her soul was elsewhere. I could feel it, and I hated how much I missed her, even when she was right there. I watched her sleep. Her face was peaceful in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a stranger. The woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had built a life with, was slipping through my fingers like grains of sand, and I was powerless to stop it. But I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. Something concrete. Something undeniable. The message haunted me. "See you tomorrow. Can't wait." Red heart. It was burned into my mind, a sickening echo that refused to be silenced. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coworker, a friend, someone I didn't know. But my gut told me otherwise. I started watching her more closely. I noted when she left and when she came home. I memorized her excuses, searching for patterns, inconsistencies. And they were there, small cracks in her carefully crafted facade. She was more guarded than ever, her phone never out of sight. Even when she was home, it was always within arm's reach. I caught her glancing at it during dinner, her eyes flickering with something, anticipation maybe? Or guilt. I didn't ask. I just watched. And then, I did something I never thought I would. I followed her. It was a Wednesday night, another late meeting. She kissed me goodbye at 7 p.m., her lips brushing mine with a softness that felt different. Forced. "I won't be too late," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "Be safe," I murmured, watching as she slipped out the door. The second the door closed, my pulse quickened. Tonight. I had to know. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and heading to the car. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd follow her, see her at some restaurant, and feel like an idiot for doubting her. But I couldn't ignore the ache in my gut. I stayed a few cars behind her, keeping my distance. She didn't go to her office. Instead, she drove downtown, weaving through traffic like she knew exactly where she was going. My heart pounded louder with every turn. And then, she pulled into a parking lot behind a restaurant. Not just any restaurant. The Carlton. My stomach dropped. The same hotel from the credit card statement. I parked a block away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind screamed at me to leave, to turn around and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my heart needed to know. She wasn't alone. I saw him before I saw her. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair. He was leaning against the wall near the entrance, his phone in hand, scrolling casually as if he wasn't about to destroy everything I'd built. And then she appeared. Emily. My Emily. But the way she smiled at him, it wasn't the smile she gave me. She walked up to him, her body language softer, more open than I'd seen in months. And when he looked up and met her gaze, his face lit up in a way that made my blood run cold. They kissed. Right there, under the dim glow of the streetlights. It wasn't a casual kiss. It was the kind of kiss that spoke of familiarity, of passion, of something that had been happening for far too long. My world tilted. The air was sucked from my lungs, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I clenched my jaw so tightly I thought my teeth might shatter. My fingers dug into the steering wheel, nails biting into the leather. I was too late. I should have walked away. But I couldn't. I watched as they walked inside, his hand brushing the small of her back, the spot that used to be mine. My vision blurred, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I could feel the rage bubbling up, hot and suffocating. But beneath it was something worse. Pain. A deep, raw ache that threatened to consume me whole. I waited. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the entrance, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me wanted to storm in there, to confront them, to demand answers. But another part, the part that still loved her, was afraid. Afraid of what I'd see, of what I'd hear. So I stayed. Hours passed. When she finally emerged, it was almost midnight. Her hair was slightly tousled, her cheeks flushed in that way I used to love after we'd spent the night tangled in each other. She was smiling, like she hadn't just shattered my heart into a million pieces. When she came home, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't look at her. I heard her footsteps as she slipped quietly into bed beside me, her body close but worlds apart. "Hey," she murmured softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Her fingers brushed against my arm, a touch that once would have ignited something in me. Now, it felt like a lie. The lies echoed louder after that night. Every touch, every smile, every "I love you." They were hollow, empty echoes of what we used to be, and I couldn't escape them. But I wasn't done. If she thought she could keep her secrets hidden, she was wrong. Lies echo louder in silence. In the days after I watched Emily disappear into that hotel with him, I moved through life in a fog. Words blurred, moments dissolved, and time lost all meaning. I went to work. I came home. I slept, if you could call it that. But I was no longer living. I was existing. And in that hollow existence, all I had were the echoes. Her voice, her laughter, her promises, whispers of a life I was no longer a part of. I could still hear them, but they didn't belong to me anymore. They belonged to him. I tried to ignore it. For the first few days, I convinced myself that I could pretend. Pretend I hadn't seen what I saw. Pretend that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. That it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But lies don't disappear just because you close your eyes. They fester. And the more I tried to bury it, the more it consumed me. I couldn't look at her without seeing his hands on her. I couldn't hear her voice without wondering if she spoke to him in the same soft, loving tone. And when she kissed me, I tasted betrayal. I became a ghost in my own home. I barely spoke. I barely touched her. And when I did, it was out of habit, not love. Emily noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked one night, her eyes searching mine as we lay in bed. Yeah, I lied. Her brow furrowed, but she didn't push. Of course, she didn't. Why would she? She was too busy hiding her own secrets to worry about mine. But I could feel her pulling away even more. The distance between us had become an ocean, and I was drowning in it. I needed answers. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just protecting myself, protecting what was left of us. But deep down, I knew. I was crossing a line. It started with her phone. She was careful, always keeping it locked, always keeping it close. But one night, she left it charging in the kitchen while she was in the shower. I stood there, staring at it like it was a ticking bomb. My heart pounded, my palms sweating as my mind screamed at me to leave it alone. But the ache in my chest drowned out the warnings. I needed to know. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I swiped up, but the screen demanded a passcode. Damn it. I tried her usual, our anniversary. Wrong. Her birthday. Wrong again. Think. I closed my eyes, trying to remember anything she'd been obsessed with lately. And then it hit me. Bailey. Our dog. I typed in his name, followed by the year we got him. Unlocked. My stomach dropped as the home screen blinked to life. My hands shook as I opened her messages. It didn't take long to find him. There was no name, just a number. But I knew. The messages told me everything. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. I miss you already. When can I see you again? He doesn't suspect anything, does he? I felt sick. My knees buckled, and I had to lean against the counter to keep from collapsing. He. That's what they call me now. Just he. As if I were a footnote in my own marriage. But it didn't stop there. The texts were bad enough, but the photos. God. The photos. I shouldn't have looked. I shouldn't have opened them. But I couldn't stop myself. There she was. My wife. In his arms. Her smile was radiant. Her eyes filled with a happiness I hadn't seen in. I couldn't remember how long. I scrolled, my heart shattering with each new image. Dinners. Drinks. Hotels. Moments that should have been ours stolen. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to smash it into a million pieces. But I couldn't, because I wasn't done. I dug deeper. If I was going to confront her, I needed more than a few texts and pictures. I needed to know how deep the betrayal ran. I went through her emails next, and that's when I found it. A flight confirmation. Chicago. 2 weeks ago. A business trip, she said was mandatory. But there, in black and white, was his name listed beside hers. Same flight. Same hotel. My vision blurred. I had to blink several times to keep the bile rising in my throat at bay. She had gone away with him. While I was home, waiting, loving her. I wasn't the man I used to be. The man I was before would have confronted her immediately. He would have demanded answers, begged for an explanation. But that man was gone. I was someone else now. Someone who was willing to do whatever it took to find the truth. That's when I started following her. It became an obsession, one I couldn't control. She told me she was working late. I followed her. She said she was meeting a friend for drinks. I watched from a distance. And every lie unraveled before my eyes. I watched her meet him again. And again. Different places. Different excuses. But the look in her eyes was always the same. Love. For him. Not me. The worst part? I couldn't stop. Even after I had all the proof I needed, I kept digging. I needed to understand. Why? Why him? Why now? Why wasn't I enough anymore? But the answers never came. All I found were more lies. More secrets. More pain. And then, I found the email. It was buried deep in her inbox, probably one she thought I'd never find. I can't do this much longer. He's starting to notice. My heart stopped. I need to tell him soon. I don't want to hurt him, but I can't keep lying. Tell me. She was going to tell me. But she hadn't. Why? I was running out of time. I could feel it. The inevitable storm brewing on the horizon. Confrontation was coming. And when it did, everything would change. Silence can be deafening. In the days after I read that email, the weight of it pressed down on me like a suffocating fog. I couldn't unsee the words. I need to tell him soon. I don't want to hurt him, but I can't keep lying. It echoed in my mind, over and over, a cruel loop that kept me teetering on the edge of madness. I don't want to hurt him. But she had. Every lie. Every touch that wasn't mine. Every moment she spent with him while I waited at home, believing we were still us. She didn't want to hurt me. She had already destroyed me. I couldn't pretend anymore. I tried. God, I tried. I went through the motions, smiled when I needed to, laughed at her jokes, kissed her goodnight. But it was all an act, a hollow performance where I played the role of the loving husband while my world fell apart. But I was unraveling. The darkness was seeping in, corroding what little was left of my sanity. I barely ate. Sleep was a luxury I no longer had. And when I did close my eyes, all I saw was her with him, loving him, wanting him, giving him what used to be mine. And then, she slipped up. It was a Thursday, one of her late nights. I hadn't followed her this time. I didn't need to. I knew where she was, who she was with. But when she came home, something was different. Her guard was down. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was exhaustion from keeping her lies straight. But she was off. Hey, she murmured, setting her purse down by the door. Hey, I replied, keeping my voice steady even though my hands clenched at my sides. She didn't meet my eyes. "I'm gonna jump in the shower," she said softly, already heading toward the stairs. Of course. Wash 'em off. Like always. But this time, I didn't let her go. Emily. Her name left my lips before I could stop myself, and she froze mid-step. I saw it. The slight stiffening of her shoulders, the hesitation in her movements. Slowly, she turned to face me. "Yeah," she asked, her voice careful. "Too careful. Lie to me. I dare you." I swallowed the lump in my throat, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "Where were you?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Her eyes flickered, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before she plastered on that same tired mask. "Work," she said softly. "Lie. Another late meeting?" I asked, my tone deceptively calm. She nodded. "Yeah. We had to go over some last-minute revisions." "Lie." I stepped closer, watching her carefully. "And the hotel? Was that part of the revisions?" Boom. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face. She blinked, her mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. "Got you. What are you talking about?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but I heard the panic beneath it. "Don't," I said softly, my tone colder than I intended. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Her bottom lip trembled, and for a split second, I saw it. Fear. I should have felt satisfaction. I had her cornered. The lies were unraveling. But all I felt was pain, because this was my wife, and I was about to destroy whatever was left of us. "I know, Emily." Her eyes met mine, and this time, she didn't look away. "Know what?" I could hear the cracks in her voice, the desperation clawing its way through. "Don't make me say it." "About him," I murmured, my throat tightening. "About the Carlton. About Chicago." Her face went pale, and her breath caught in her throat. I saw it all in her eyes. The truth, the regret, the realization that the game was over. And I hated her for it. "Daniel." My name came out in a whisper, a plea wrapped in sorrow. "How long?" I didn't mean to ask. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked away, her gaze falling to the floor like it might offer her some kind of escape. "Emily." My voice was softer this time, but there was an edge beneath it. "How long?" Her eyes slowly met mine again, and when she finally spoke, 6 months. It felt like the air was knocked out of me. 6 months. Half a year. Half a year of lies. Half a year of her giving herself to someone else while I stood on the sidelines, oblivious. "Why?" The word came out broken, barely above a whisper. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw the woman I used to know. The woman I loved. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I was lonely, Daniel. I felt like we were just going through the motions. And he made me feel." Her words trailed off, but I heard them anyway. He made her feel alive. And I hadn't. Was it love? My throat tightened as I asked the question I was terrified to know the answer to. She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I had my answer. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Not a no. Something inside me shattered. I felt it. The last piece of hope I'd been clinging to crumbling to dust. My mind screamed at me to leave, to walk away before I said something I couldn't take back. But my heart wanted to bleed. "Did you ever think about me?" I asked, my voice raw. Her tears fell freely now, streaking down her cheeks. "Of course I did. I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel." But she had. And the worst part? She didn't stop. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her face crumpled, and she took a shaky breath. "I was scared," she whispered. I thought I could fix it. That maybe we could go back to the way things used to be. But we couldn't. We never would." "It's too late, Emily." The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and I saw the moment they hit her. Her eyes widened, her breath hitching as her body sagged, as if the weight of her own betrayal had finally crushed her. "Daniel, please, don't beg." I shook my head, my vision blurring as I stepped back. "You already chose." Silence filled the space between us. But this time, it was the sound of the end. The silence after a storm is the loudest sound in the world. After the words left my mouth, "You already chose," everything stopped. Emily didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood there, frozen, her lips slightly parted, her eyes wide and glassy, her chest rising and falling with shallow, uneven breaths. And me? I felt nothing. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, all of it had bled out of me the moment I saw the truth in her eyes. What was left was emptiness. A hollow, gaping void where love used to be. Daniel. Her voice barely broke the silence, a cracked whisper that trembled with desperation. Don't. I couldn't look at her. Not anymore. Please. She took a hesitant step toward me, her hand reaching out, but I pulled back instinctively. Her touch felt foreign now. Don't. I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. She froze, her hand lingering in the space between us, trembling as if it physically hurt her to not be able to touch me. But I couldn't let her. Not after everything. I turned away. I couldn't stand the sight of her, of the woman who had once been my everything, but had become a stranger overnight. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said softly, her voice cracking under the weight of her own guilt. I didn't stop. I closed my eyes, my jaw clenched so tightly I thought my teeth might crack. Don't. I said again, harsher this time. Just stop. No more lies. No more excuses. No more pretending. It's over, Emily. The words tasted like ashes in my mouth. Her breath hitched. Daniel, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake, but a mistake? I turned back to her, and the look in her eyes almost broke me. Almost. 6 months, Emily, I said, my voice laced with a bitterness I could no longer contain. 6 fucking months. Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. But what? I snapped, my control slipping. You didn't mean for it to happen? You didn't want to hurt me? She flinched like I had struck her. You could have stopped, I said, my voice quieter now, but the hurt was no less potent. You could have told me, but you didn't. Her silence was an admission of guilt louder than any confession could have been. Do you love him? The question slipped out before I could stop it, even though I already knew the answer. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted away, her lips trembling as she struggled for words. I don't know. Not a no. Never a no. My chest tightened, the weight of her hesitation crushing whatever pieces of my heart were still intact. Jesus, Emily. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the length of the room because standing still felt impossible. I didn't want this, she whispered, her voice broken and barely audible. Neither did I murmured, my throat tight. But here we were. So what now? The question hung in the air like smoke, suffocating both of us. Her eyes, swollen and red, finally met mine. And in them, I saw it, fear. Fear of losing me. Fear of what came next. But the part that shattered me the most? There was no fight left in her. She wasn't begging me to stay. She wasn't promising to fix this. Because deep down she knew. We had crossed a line we could never come back from. I don't know, she whispered. Her voice was so small, so fragile, that for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I needed air. The walls were closing in, the weight of her presence suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. I need to get out of here, I muttered, my voice hoarse. Daniel, I didn't stop. I couldn't. I grabbed my keys off the counter, ignoring the way her voice cracked as she said my name. Please. But I was already halfway to the door. Don't go. I paused for a brief moment, my hand resting on the doorknob. And for the briefest of seconds, I almost turned around. Almost. But then I remembered. The texts, the photos, the lies. And I walked out the door. The night air was cold and unforgiving. It hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. Anything was better than suffocating in that house. Our house. I stood on the porch, my mind racing, my body trembling with the weight of what had just happened. This was real. It was over. The life I had built with her gone. And I had no idea what came next. I walked. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay still. The night was quiet, the distant hum of the city a constant reminder that life went on, whether I was ready for it or not. My mind was a mess, a tangled web of anger, heartbreak, and questions I didn't want answers to. How did we get here? I whispered the words to no one, my voice carried away by the wind. But there was no answer. There never would be. By the time I came back, it was almost dawn. The house was dark, the weight of its emptiness pressing down on me as I stepped inside. She was gone. Her keys were still on the counter, her shoes by the door. But I didn't hear her. Good. I wasn't ready to face her again. Not yet. I stood in the living room, staring at the life we had built together. Photos of us lined the walls, smiling, laughing, happy. Lies. It was all a lie. And now it was over. I didn't know how long I stood there. Time felt meaningless. But eventually, the exhaustion caught up with me. My body was tired, but my mind was at war with itself. I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. And for the first time since it all started, I broke. Silent sobs racked my body, shaking me to my core. I had been holding it in for too long, trying to be strong, trying to pretend that I could handle it. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I had lost her. And in the process, I had lost myself. Emptiness has a sound. It's the absence of footsteps where they used to be. The hollow echo of a quiet house that once pulsed with life. It's the creak of the floorboards that no longer announce her arrival. The distant hum of the refrigerator that fills the silence where laughter used to live. Emptiness sounds a lot like grief. And grief? It lingers. She was gone. When I woke up the next morning, or maybe it was afternoon, I found her side of the bed cold. I don't remember hearing her leave, but I felt the weight of her absence the moment I opened my eyes. Her pillow was untouched. The indentation that had once been a constant reminder of her presence was gone, smoothed over like she had never been there at all. Erased. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word from the night before. I don't know if I love him. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Her voice echoed through my mind, a cruel reminder of the life we had lost. I tried to breathe, but every inhale felt like swallowing glass. She was really gone. I should have felt relief. I thought that once she was gone, the pain would lessen, that the silence would bring peace. But it didn't. If anything, it was worse. Because now, there was nothing left to distract me from the gaping hole where she used to be. The house felt unfamiliar without her. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall was a monument to what we had built. And now, those memories mocked me. Her laughter echoed in the quiet. I heard it in the kitchen where she used to hum while making coffee. I felt it in the living room where we'd curl up on the couch after long days. I saw it in the photos that lined the hallway. Happy, smiling, oblivious. But it was all a lie. A fucking lie. I tried to clean up. At first, I thought maybe, if I removed the reminders, I could breathe again. I started in the kitchen, clearing away the mugs she used to leave by the sink. But then I saw the one with the chipped handle, the one I had bought her from that little shop in Seattle. Her favorite. My fingers tightened around it, and for a moment, I thought about smashing it, hurling it across the room, watching it shatter the way my heart had. But I couldn't. I wasn't ready to let go. So I left it. I left everything. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her perfume lingered in the bathroom. Her books sat neatly stacked on the nightstand. It was like she was still here, like she might walk through the door at any moment and everything would go back to the way it was. But she wouldn't. I knew that. I just wasn't ready to accept it. Days blurred together. I stopped checking the time. I didn't go to work. I didn't eat much. I didn't answer my phone. The world kept spinning, but I was standing still, frozen in the wreckage. I hated her. I told myself that over and over again. I hated her for lying. I hated her for choosing him. I hated her for making me believe that we were okay when we were anything but. But the truth? I hated myself more. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The distance. The late nights. The change in her smile. How could I not have noticed? What kind of husband doesn't see his wife slipping away until it's too late? I had been so wrapped up in the idea of us, the version of us I thought we still were, that I ignored the cracks forming right beneath my feet. And now, I was paying the price. I thought about calling her. 1,000 times. Every time, my fingers hovered over her number, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out my better judgment. What would I even say? I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg her to come home. I wanted to ask her if he was worth it. But most of all, I just wanted to hear her voice. But I didn't. I never called. Because deep down I knew. It wouldn't change anything. The nights were the worst. When the house was quiet and the darkness pressed down on me like a suffocating weight, that's when the memories came. I saw her in my mind, laughing, touching me, looking at me the way she used to. But then, the images shifted. I saw her with him, his hands on her, his lips on hers, her body melting into his the way she used to melt into mine. It was torture, and I couldn't escape it. I needed to get out. The house was suffocating me, the walls closing in, the memories clawing at my sanity. So, one night, I grabbed my keys and just drove. No destination, no plan, just away. I drove for hours, the night stretching endlessly before me. The city lights blurred past, and for the first time in days, I felt numb. And numb was better than feeling anything at all. I ended up at the beach. It was late, too late for anyone else to be around. The waves crashed against the shore, the salty breeze stinging my face as I stood there, staring out at the endless expanse of darkness. It felt fitting, empty, silent, vast, just like me. Why? The words slipped out, carried away by the wind. Why her? Why him? Why wasn't I enough? But the ocean didn't answer. It never does. I stayed there for hours, just standing, letting the cold seep into my bones, hoping it would numb the ache inside. But no matter how long I stood there, the pain stayed. When I finally came home, the house was still just as empty, just as quiet. But something had shifted inside me. I was tired, tired of grieving, tired of hurting, tired of being a prisoner in my own life. I couldn't keep living like this. So, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her ghost haunt me anymore. I needed to let go, even if it killed me. Goodbyes don't happen all at once. They happen in pieces. In the quiet moments when you find her favorite mug in the back of the cabinet. In the way your hand instinctively reaches for hers in the middle of the night, only to find emptiness. In the sudden stillness of a house that used to pulse with life, now reduced to nothing but echoes. Goodbyes are slow. They seep into your bones, linger in the spaces she left behind, and tighten around your chest when you least expect it. And they never ask if you're ready. It had been a week since she left. 7 days. 168 hours. But I felt every second. The ache didn't lessen. If anything, it grew, feeding off the silence that now filled every inch of our home. Her things were still here. Her clothes hung neatly in the closet, her scent still clinging faintly to the fabric. Her toothbrush sat beside mine in the bathroom, untouched since the night I walked out. Her books, her shoes, her perfume, all reminders of the life we had built. A life that no longer existed. I had avoided it for as long as I could. But I knew. It was time. Time to face what I had been running from. Time to let go, even if it tore me apart. I started with the bedroom. The air was heavy in there, thick with memories that clung to the walls like ghosts. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just staring. The bed was still unmade from the last night we had shared. The sheets tangled, the pillow where she used to sleep indented with the shape of her absence. God, I wasn't ready for this. But I had to be, because holding on to the past wasn't going to fix anything. I opened her side of the closet first. Her clothes stared back at me, bright colors and soft fabrics that still smelled faintly of her. How do you pack away a life? My hands shook as I reached for one of her blouses, the silk sliding between my fingers like water. I remembered the night she wore it. Our anniversary. Dinner by the water. Her eyes sparkling as she laughed at one of my terrible jokes. That was before the lies, before the betrayal, before I lost her. I swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in my eyes. Just do it, Daniel. I grabbed a box and started folding, one piece at a time. Every shirt, every dress, every memory, folding them away, packing them up, letting her go. But then, I found it, at the back of the closet, tucked away in the corner where she kept things she rarely wore. A small, faded shoebox. My chest tightened as I pulled it out, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. I knew what it was before I even opened it. Our memories. Photographs, ticket stubs, love notes scribbled on napkins from the early days when everything was simple and perfect. I sank to the floor, the box resting in my lap as I opened the lid. And there we were, smiling, happy, before everything fell apart. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. I flipped through the photos, each one a dagger to my heart. Our first vacation, her laughing in the rain, the way she looked at me on our wedding day, like I was her whole world. When did that change? When did I stop being enough? My vision blurred, but I didn't stop. I kept going until I found it. The letter, folded neatly at the bottom of the box, the edges slightly worn from being handled too many times. Her handwriting. My throat tightened as I unfolded it, my heart pounding so loudly it echoed in my ears. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I was too much of a coward to say goodbye the way you deserved. I don't know where to begin. I don't know how to explain why I did what I did without sounding like I'm making excuses. Maybe that's because there's no excuse. I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. You were everything to me. You still are. But somewhere along the way, I got lost, and I dragged you down with me. I didn't want this. I didn't mean for this to happen, but I was too weak to stop it. I loved you, Daniel. I still do, but I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if it can be fixed. Maybe it's too late. Maybe I ruined everything. But if there's any part of you that can forgive me, I hope you find it someday. Because even if we can't go back, I'll never stop loving you. Goodbye. Her words crushed me. My hands shook as I held the letter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I'll never stop loving you. Then why did you leave me? I should have been angry. I should have thrown the letter away. But instead, I read it again and again until the words blurred and the pain became unbearable. I sat there for hours, clutching the letter like it was the last piece of her I had left. Because maybe it was. When I finally stood up, the sun was beginning to set. The light filtering through the window painted the room in hues of gold and orange, but it felt cold. The box of her things sat beside me, packed away. But the memories? They were still here, and they always would be. I wasn't ready to let go. Not completely, but I had taken the first step. And maybe that was enough for now. The weight of goodbye is unbearable, but sometimes it's the only way to survive. Moving on doesn't happen all at once. It's not a decision. It's not a switch you can flip. It's 1,000 tiny moments. It's waking up and not immediately thinking about her. It's walking through the house and noticing the quiet a little less. It's finding her things and feeling the ache, but not breaking down. It's a slow fade, like the echo of a song you used to love but can't listen to anymore. It lingers, but it's quieter now. And sometimes, when the silence stretches too far, you almost miss it. I wasn't okay. Not by a long shot. But I was functioning. It had been 2 weeks since I packed her things. 2 weeks since I found the letter. 2 weeks of trying to exist without her. I went back to work. Forced myself to smile when coworkers asked if I was okay. Pretended everything was fine when friends sent check-in texts that I didn't have the energy to respond to. But it was all an act. Because when I came home, I still saw her everywhere. In the way the sunlight hit the kitchen counter where she used to drink her coffee. In the dent on her side of the couch where she curled up with her favorite blanket. In the silence of a house that used to breathe with her presence. She was gone, but we were still everywhere. I avoided the places we used to go. The little Italian restaurant down the street where we had our first date. The bookstore where she spent hours running her fingers along the spines of novels, always buying more than she could read. The park where we used to walk Bailey on Sunday mornings, laughing as he tugged at the leash, chasing squirrels he could never catch. They weren't just places anymore. They were reminders, landmines waiting to detonate. So I stayed away. But avoidance only takes you so far. Because eventually, the memories find you. It happened at the grocery store. I was walking through the aisles, minding my own business, when I saw it. Her cereal. The one she used to eat every morning. The one I used to tease her about because it was basically sugar disguised as breakfast. Cinnamon Crunch. The sight of it hit me harder than I expected. My feet stopped. My breath caught. And suddenly, I was back there. In our kitchen. Her sitting on the counter, legs swinging, a bowl in her lap as she grinned at me with milk dribbling down her chin. "You're such a child," I had teased, trying to wipe it away, but she pulled back, laughing. "And you love it," she'd replied, her eyes sparkling with mischief. God, I could almost hear her laughter, feel the warmth of her presence. For a moment, it was like she was still here. But then reality came crashing down, cold and unforgiving. She wasn't here, and she never would be again. I left the store without buying anything. I couldn't breathe. The memories, they were suffocating me. I tried to outrun them, tried to bury myself in work, tried to lose myself in meaningless conversations, tried to pretend that I was okay. But grief doesn't work that way. You can't run from it. It follows you. It waits. And when you're alone, it hits you like a tidal wave. Nights were still the hardest. The bed felt too big, too empty. I used to reach for her in my sleep, my body seeking the warmth that had always been there. But now, all I found was cold. I stopped sleeping on my side of the bed. It felt too lonely. Instead, I moved to the couch. At least there, I didn't have to face the emptiness. Her texts stopped coming. At first, she had tried. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I miss you. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was there to say? I miss you too, but it doesn't change what you did. I love you, but I can't forgive you. There were no words that could fix this. So I let the silence grow between us. And eventually, she stopped trying. That should have made it easier. It didn't. The silence where she used to be felt heavier now. And I hated how much I missed her voice. I tried dating. Or at least, I tried to try. Friends pushed me to get out, to move on, to meet someone new. So I went. I smiled. I nodded. I made small talk. But it felt wrong. I couldn't do it. Every laugh felt forced. Every touch felt foreign. Every conversation felt hollow. Because none of them were her. And maybe that was the problem. I wasn't ready to let go of her, because I was still holding on to us. But I couldn't live like this forever. Stuck between the past and the present. Caught in the in-between where memories weighed heavier than reality. I had to let her go, even if it killed me. The first real step came when I went to the park. Our park. I hadn't been there since before everything fell apart. But something pulled me there. Maybe I was tired of running. Maybe I just wanted to feel close to her one last time. It was quieter than I remembered. The trees whispered in the wind, the distant laughter of children playing echoing softly in the air. Bailey wasn't with me this time. I couldn't bring myself to take him. Not yet. But I walked the path we used to take, every step a bittersweet reminder of what we had lost. And when I reached the bench where we used to sit, I finally let myself break. Tears fell freely. No more holding back. No more pretending. I let the grief consume me. Because maybe, if I let it out, I could finally start to heal. I'm sorry, Emily. I whispered, my voice trembling as the weight of everything came crashing down. I'm sorry I wasn't enough. The wind carried my words away, but I hoped. Somehow she heard them. That's the thing about moving on. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering, without letting the memories hold you hostage. And as I sat there, for the first time, I felt a little lighter. The slow fade of us was almost complete. And maybe that was okay. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, painfully slow. It's waking up and realizing the ache in your chest is a little less suffocating. It's going a whole day without thinking about her smile and not feeling guilty for it. It's hearing her name and not falling apart. Healing is quiet. It happens in the spaces between heartbeats. And sometimes, you don't even realize it's happening. It had been 3 months since she left. 90 days. 2,160 hours. And I was still here. Standing. Breathing. Surviving. The weight wasn't gone, but it was different now. It didn't crush me the way it used to. The grief was still there. A dull ache instead of a stabbing pain. And that was progress. The house felt less suffocating. I had packed away most of her things. The closet was empty now. Her favorite mug was no longer on the kitchen counter. The scent of her perfume had finally faded from the bathroom. But her presence lingered. Not in the haunting, painful way it used to, but softly, like a whisper. A quiet reminder of what was. Bailey felt it too. He spent the first few weeks waiting by the door, ears perked up every time footsteps echoed outside, waiting for her to come home. But eventually, he stopped. And I think, so did I? The mornings were easier. The heaviness that used to greet me when I woke up was fading. I started going for runs again, something I hadn't done since before everything. At first, it was just an excuse to get out of the house, to escape the memories that clung to the walls. But soon, it became something more. A release. A way to breathe again. With each mile, I felt lighter. With each breath, I let a little more of her go. I went back to the park. The same path. The same bench. But this time, it didn't hurt as much. The memories were still there, of course. They always would be. But they didn't suffocate me. They didn't anchor me to the past. They just existed. A part of me. But not all of me. I didn't realize how far I'd come until one night. I dreamed of her. It wasn't like the others. In those dreams, she was always just out of reach, my fingers brushing against her as she slipped away. But this time, she was smiling. We were standing in the park, the breeze tugging at her hair, the sunlight painting her face with warmth. She looked happy, but not with me. And for the first time, that was okay. Are you okay? She asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her. The woman I had loved with every fiber of my being. The woman who had broken me. But also, the woman who had taught me how to feel. I think I will be, I finally whispered. Her eyes filled with something sad, but also proud. Good. And just like that, she was gone. I woke up with tears in my eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were something else. Acceptance. Closure. The next day, I did something I had been avoiding. I went to the storage unit where I had put her things. I stood there, staring at the boxes that held the remnants of our life together. Memories, but no longer mine to carry. I took a deep breath, and I let them go. Donated. Gone. And with each box I carried out, I felt the weight on my chest grow lighter. Because I was finally making room for something new. Closure doesn't mean forgetting. It means making peace with the past. And I was ready. It happened on a random Tuesday. I was standing in line at a coffee shop, scrolling through emails, when I felt it. Lightness. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of her absence. It was just quiet. And I realized I was okay. Excuse me, is this seat taken? Her voice pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up, and there she was. Not Emily. Someone new. Her smile was warm, her eyes kind. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled back. No, it's not. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, that's enough. The dawn after the darkness is quiet. But if you listen closely, it's full of hope.